Namaskar everyone. WWF India and Global Tiger Forum welcomes you from slightly cold weather of Delhi to gain insights about another tiger range country, that is India. Global Tiger Forum and WWF India, under the USAID funded project Asia's Linear Infrastructure Safeguarding Nature, ALIGN, has conceived the webinar series Safeguarding Nature in Tiger Range Countries. ALIGN is implemented by WWF in partnership with Center for Large Landscape Conservation, CLLC, with three focal partners, WWF Nepal, WWF Mongolia, and WWF India. Every tiger range country has its unique geography, resource capacity, and tiger habitat. The webinar series aims to understand the challenges and opportunities available while conserving tiger habitat when infrastructure development is needed too. In the current webinar series, we will explore the fabrics of conservation of tiger and its habitat implemented by National Tiger Conservation Authority, NTCA, along with the nature-friendly engineering safeguards being implemented by National Highway Authority of India. I would request Dr. Dipankar Ghosh to open the webinar with his introductory remark. Dr. Dipankar Ghosh is a Senior Director, Biodiversity Conservation in WWF India. He is a veteran wildlife biologist and a conservation manager, currently leading the program for terrestrial and aerial wildlife conservation in the organization. He supervises a team of 150 staff members working in 9 landscapes in the country. He has passion in photography, has authored multiple short articles towards contributing to conservation successes in India and beyond. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ridhima. And I would first like to welcome our two resource persons, Dr. Vaibhav Mathur and Mr. Pankaj Maurya. Namaskar. I mean, thanks a lot for joining us on a work day morning. I think your insights would be fantastic. Before we get into the depth of the program, why tiger range countries in India? When we talk about tigers, wherever we talk, whichever corner of the world, I think the first country, the name that comes up is India, because India has shown demonstrated leadership, and which has also come up, whether it is political leadership, thought leadership of the forest department, and even other departments. And that is something that we are seeing, that India is on a development pathway. We all know that our current GDP is close to $4 trillion. And within the next couple of years, it's going to possibly hit a $5 trillion economy. Now, what does it mean? And some of the figures are quite startling. The budget this year for National Highways Authority of India, I'm not trying to steal the thunder from what Mr. Maurya will be talking, is 168 lakh crore, and that for the railways is 262 lakh crore. In terms of, if we compare it with international investments, it's about 50 billion US dollars. Now that's phenomenal. Now that investment is also coming up with safeguards. And this is something that I would say when we started our conservation work, we had the India Eco-Development Projects way back in the 90s. Safeguards were there, but safeguards did not have the backing of such large funding. And currently the narrative has changed. India has that funding and India is looking at safeguards. I remember, in fact, Dr. Mathur would also remember sometime, I think it was possibly 2013-14 or so, there was a meeting which was organized by NTCA, and we were looking at, there were representatives from MORTH and linear infrastructure agencies. The discussion was that how could we include safeguards? And what we have seen in the last few years, just before COVID hit us, we saw a notification from Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, which actually stated that new roads or highways should be constructed outside protected areas. So the whole safeguards idea, it's not being pushed by the MOEFCC, the Ministry of Environment, which is the custodian of wildlife and forest, but this has also been taken up by the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways. We have attended some meetings with the Ministry of Railways, and some of my colleagues were also there with the Northeastern Railways and with few others. And they have said that they are now testing use of cables, use of optical fiber cables to identify presence, absence of large mammals like elephants, to reduce elephant deaths on railway tracks. So I think this whole idea of sensitization is really getting to the decision makers of these developing, I would say, ministries and departments. There are 2-3 things. One is that India has also demonstrated not just tiger conservation, but also recovery of species. Dr. Mathur himself is from Assam and a senior IFS officer from Assam Cadre. India has demonstrated the recovery of rhinos, and as recently as this century, building a new population of rhinos, rather a re-established population of rhinos in Manas, which is also part of a transboundary protected area, is tough, with full support of the government and different agencies of the Bodoland Tribal Council. I think that is fantastic. How do we ensure that that habitat remains completely protected, completely connected with the larger landscape? So I think those are the discussions that we need to have with the development agencies. Similarly, also the recent recovery of tigers in some of the areas, Satyamangalam, Pilivit, the new tiger reserves have shown phenomenal recovery. They have got awards at a global level. So are there some ways where we can perhaps sensitize more people? I think some of these webinars that we are doing, and again, thanks to both Dr. Mathur and Mr. Maurya, I think your talks, your sessions will sensitize people. And if we can also have the recording and maybe have snippets slightly edited and make it crisp, that can be shown to the developers, that can be shown to the engineers who are working, because sometimes whether a passage is good enough for elephants, an underpass is good enough for elephants, what are the disturbances that one needs to take care of, or what are the habitat requirements that one needs to take care of. I think if we get some of these small snippets from the experts, that would be fantastic. So I'll stop here, and thanks again. Thanks to all the participants, the resource persons, and I wish you all a great workshop. I'll be a listener now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. That was an optimistic start to the webinar, I would say. I would like to invite Mr. Monish Kapoor, Head Program and Partnership, Global Tiger Forum, to introduce the TRCs and the presenters. Over to you, Monish.
Thank you, Ridhima. And taking it forward from Dr. Dipankar Ghosh, as we're talking about India now, which holds more than 70% of the global wild tiger population, and with efforts that are now being replicated in other tiger range countries, whether it is the countrywide assessment, whether it is the institutional framework of the NTCA, that we are going to hear more about from our next speaker. I take this opportunity to invite Dr. Vaibhav Mathur. Dr. Mathur holds Masters in Epidemiology from the Indian Veterinary Research Institute and joined the Indian Forest Service in 2006. Born on the Assam cadre, his keen interest in wildlife saw him complete the postgraduate diploma in wildlife management from the Wildlife Institute of India in 2010. He was subsequently posted as director of Dibru-Saikhowa Biosphere Reserve, where he managed 2 protected areas. During his stint, he successfully completed the protected area tactical enforcement conservation training at the Khao Yai National Park in Thailand under the aegis of ASEAN WIN. He moved to the National Tiger Conservation Authority in 2014, wherein he was part of several policy initiatives in tiger conservation and wildlife sector. On his return to the state, he served as Joint Director at the Kaziranga Tiger Reserve and then as Field Director, Manas Tiger Reserve. He is currently serving as Deputy Inspector General at the NTCA at New Delhi and remains a key focal person for the Global Tiger Forum in all its collaborations and global events. Thank you, sir, and we welcome you on behalf of all the partners.
Thank you so much, Monish, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting the National Tiger Conservation Authority to present the perspectives in context of how tiger conservation has evolved in the country over a period of time, and how the establishment of the National Tiger Conservation Authority has in fact mainstreamed the agenda of linear infrastructure in the country. While striking a balance between conservation and development was always there, it was only after the National Tiger Conservation Authority was established did the mandate and role clearly specify uh, how we manage linear infrastructure and what provisions of the law actually enforce the requirement of having mitigation of linear infrastructure passing through our tiger landscapes. So most of you may be well aware, before independence, India was not known for conservation. It was a completely different ballgame. It was rather known for tiger hunting and tiger shikar. Even our own corporates like the Air India were used to market India, attracting people to come and perform a tiger shikar. Even the US Government of India Tourist Office, which was in the US, was marketing India for the tiger shikar. So this resulted in a gradual decimation of tigers and their associated habitats over a period of time. We were having this relic from the period of the British. And while we don't have any authentic population records of those times, it is largely based out of the trophies which were curated by Van Ingen in Mysore in South India, through which we have some kind of evidence that there were a lot of tigers earlier and then gradually it dropped down to a substantially low population. However, if you can change the slide, if you see post-independence, there was a gradual shift in thought process. Just request to change the slide, please. So after independence, even after independence, the shikar and the hunting continued, but there was a gradual shift in the thought process. It was first in 1969 in the IUCN General Assembly, which was held in India, that a call was taken that one should ban tiger hunting. So that it was largely an advocacy. There was no per se a decision in this regard. But considering the advocacy which started with a lot of conservationists like EPG, JC Daniel, speaking on the plight of tigers, a gradual shift started happening in the thought process in India that tigers should be conserved and this hunting should be completely banned. In fact, the Government of India in 1970 constituted a task force which had predicted the extinction of the tiger by the year 1970 itself. So that was the scale of the hunting and the decimation of tigers, other wildlife and the habitats which was happening. So, however, 1972 was a watershed year in context of Indian wildlife. The Wildlife Protection Act came into being, and almost simultaneously, Government of India started a project called Project Tiger. Next slide, please. Humble project, which was first initiated in 8 tiger reserves, and later at the behest of the then Prime Minister of India, who was of the opinion that all landscapes of the country should be covered. While we are attempting this project, the Sundarbans was added as the 9th site. So it started off as a very humble project. In fact, it started off from the leftover money of another scheme, a food-related scheme which was existing at that point of time in India. The leftover money of that particular scheme and a small grant from the WWF, which started off Project Tiger. It was inaugurated at the now Corbett Tiger Reserve, and the objectives were quite fundamental. That was to ensure a viable tiger population of India over a period of time. And this gentleman you see here is Shri Kailash Sankla, who was the first Project Tiger director. Next slide, please. But what was the need to focus on tigers. What was the importance? I mean, you all are practitioners. It's a very fundamental thing which we all learn in school, is the concept of the food chain, where you preserve and conserve the apex trophic level, and the other hierarchical trophic levels below it get automatic protection and security. So that was the fundamental logic of Project Tiger. In fact, we are asked, even as on date, that why are we focusing so much on tigers and not in other species? So this is our response, that it lies in the very tenets of ecology, the fundamentals of ecology, as to why apex species, keystone species, charismatic species need to be preserved. But apart from this scientific concept, in India, it is deeply rooted in our culture and tradition. Lordess Durga rides a tiger. In Bandhavgarh Tiger Reserve, the tiger is worshipped. The bottom left photo, if you see. Then in the Sundarbans landscape, the tiger is revered. Bon Bibi, some of you may have heard. Then you have Varahi, which is rides a tiger. So it's deeply ingrained, and this particular aspect of the tiger being ingrained in our culture has really helped us in securing the objective which was enshrined. Apart from that, it is also the face of modern India. India is marketed across the world with the 3 T's. Tiger, of course, is one, and the other 2 being the uh, Taj Mahal and tea, which is for which India is famous. Next slide, please. So after the start of Project Tiger, there were a lot of successes. In fact, India was basking in the glory of Project Tiger. But however, all was not well. There was still an undercurrent of poaching which was happening, which then was brought in light by a seizure of 2,200 pounds of tiger bones in New Delhi in 1993. So roughly, if you do a calculation, this was from about 80 odd tigers, and gradually the realization came that we are probably heading towards the second tiger crisis. So next slide, please. Once again, the government constituted a task force, but this particular task force was much more forward-looking, much more positive than the task force of 1970, which had predicted an extinction by the end of 1970 itself. So there were several agendas which were discussed by this task force. It was chaired by this lady, Sunita Narayan, who heads the Center for Science and Environment, and a very dedicated team of officers and scientists from the Project Tiger division and the Wildlife Institute of India. We had Dr. Rajesh Gopal at the helm of affairs at that point of time, who's currently heading the Global Tiger Forum, Dr. Jhala, Professor Kamar, then we had P.R. Sinha sir, the director, Dr. V.B. Mathur, the Dean of Wildlife Institute of India. So they were a very forward-looking bunch, came about with a lot of inputs for the task force, and some of the major recommendations out of the different agendas that were discussed are listed out here. The one being that the previous one itself, that the Project Tiger should be converted into a statutory authority to give it more teeth, and that resulted in the creation of the body where I work today, which is the National Tiger Conservation Authority. Then in fact, it had recommended that the Project Tiger director should be given the power to enforce his directions through the provisions of law. All his directions should have a legal binding. So while the director post was not given that power, the authority was given that power, that any direction which is given by the authority is legally binding to anybody or any organization on which it is given. So the member secretary exercises those powers for the authority. Then it also recommended that independent audits should be carried out of tiger reserves. So that materialized and resulted in the management effectiveness evaluation framework. We'll speak about that a little while later. And now India is the only country to have completed that evaluation of tiger reserves 5 times. Most importantly, what the Tiger Task Force recommended was that you should have a very robust system of estimating your tiger populations. Earlier, the pug mark system was being used. Now, inherently, there is no problem with the pug mark system, but there is the issue of there's a lot of subjectivity with respect to the substrate on which the tiger is walking. If it's walking on dry land, the pug mark would give a different shape. If it's walking on wet terrain, then the output of a pug mark would be different. So this created subjectivity, and there was an element of doubt that a single tiger may be read as twice. So that particular system was done away with, and a very robust system involving camera trapping, mark recapture frameworks were evolved, tested in the field in a population with a known, in an area with a known population of tigers, and then subsequently it was opened, and through a peer-reviewed journal it was published also. So since then, we have been following this methodology of using camera traps to estimate the tigers in a mark recapture framework. Next slide, please. So what the task force recommended was the creation of an authority for tiger conservation. So Project Tiger was then, directorate was now converted into the National Tiger Conservation Authority. Now, it had been given a lot of mandates in the Act. It's all enshrined in the Act. A separate chapter has been given in the Wildlife Protection Act for tiger conservation. India is again the only country in the world to have a legislation for wildlife which has a chapter on a species, which is the tiger. So we are quite blessed that way, thanks to the vision of those gentlemen and the task force that report. Joining the dots, still as on date, I would see for any wildlife practitioner, it's a seminal document. One should have a look at it, read it, and it would offer a solution to most of the problems which we are still facing today. Now, in context of today's theme, the NTCA was also mandated to allow and assess or disallow any ecologically unsustainable land use under Section 3801B and 3801G. This is of special relevance to this particular thematic area, which we would be talking about today. This is from where it all started. Nobody was doing mitigation, suggesting measures how to alter the structure of a particular project, especially linear infrastructure, how best we can avoid the damaging effects of developing such infrastructure. So people were not, it would have been at the back of their mind, but there was no provision through which they were actually enforcing it. So after this amendment, Section 3801B and 3801G came into being, and based on which a lot of scrutiny started. And we'll discuss that in the subsequent few slides. Next slide, please. So what has the NTCA been doing after its creation? So a lot of technical support is being provided. There are several advisories, guidelines, standard operating procedures, which have been issued by the National Tiger Conservation Authority. Like I said, tiger estimation evolved, a new robust, statistically robust methodology evolved, which we have now used for 5 times, the only country to have used to have estimated its tigers 5 times using this robust framework. Then another mandate under 3801B, like I said, was securing connecting landscape, again of relevance in today's webinar. What the NTCA, along with the Wildlife Institute of India, did was to delineate all major tiger corridors where there was, based on the data which it had collected over these cycles of tiger estimation, and which were those most probable areas from which tigers are going to migrate, and again publish this seminal document, Connecting Tigers for Long-Term Population. It's all available on the website of the NTCA and Wildlife Institute of India, which you can go through. So important in context of today's, and based on the delineation that was done by the NTCA and the Wildlife Institute of India, states themselves have now undertaken this task of identifying areas because they are on the ground. They know the best possible, the most probable area from which a tiger or wildlife may pass through. So they are further refining this document through their tiger conservation plans, which is again a statutory document, which again emanated from the task force which we spoke about a few minutes back. So overall, overarching, the Wildlife Institute of India and the National Tiger Conservation Authority came out with this seminal document, and this document is now further being refined by various all tiger reserves, and it is being made part of the statutory tiger conservation plan. Then the other technical support which is provided to the states is for management effectiveness evaluation. Like I said, we are the only country to have done it 5 times in a row now, every 4 years. Then we've also done economic valuation of tiger reserves, which has basically highlighted the value of the intangibles which a tiger reserve gives. Because often we are asked this question as to what are your tiger reserves doing in context of what value is a tiger to the common people, and what is the economic benefit which one can derive from a tiger or a tiger reserve. So while there are direct benefits of employment and tourism, the intangibles are most often neglected. So this exercise was done in collaboration with the Indian Institute of Forest Management in Bhopal. And we now have done this exercise for 16 tiger reserves, and we now know the value of the intangibles these tiger reserves provide. Next slide, please. Apart from the technical support, the National Tiger Conservation Authority also steers the Project Tiger scheme, which is a centrally sponsored scheme of the Government of India. And our budget, if you see, is largely for these activities. There are a list of 17 activities, overarching activities, which we have identified. And some of them are listed here. Protection, of course, anti-poaching strategies and mechanisms and logistics are funded. We have a force called the Special Tiger Protection Force, which is operational in around 7 tiger reserves currently. A lot of inputs for habitat management are given. Technology is funded. M-Stripes is a Android application which is now being used extensively in tiger reserves for daily patrolling as well as for collecting ecological data. We'll speak about that a little while later. Managing man-animal conflict. In fact, it's a statutory mandate of the NTCA to actually look into this. Awareness and outreach. Eco-development. How do you involve people? How do you have an inclusive agenda? Then village relocation, which is a completely voluntary process, is being funded by through the Project Tiger scheme. We have also evolved an annual phase 4 monitoring protocol, which tiger reserves do every year to keep a pulse on the tiger numbers. So we fund that too. However, if you note this particular graph, you'll see a slight downward trend. So this is largely because of a procedural change which happened in the fund disbursal mechanisms as directed by the Ministry of Finance, Government of India. So we are now more or less stable, and hopefully in the next coming few years, we should see an upward trend once again. The graph down below is basically the funds which are given to the NTCA to run to carry out its mandate, be it project based or be it doing research themselves or through any outsource agency. So that has been largely been stagnant over the last few years. So this year, we would probably be expending more money on research and allied activities. So that should also see an uptick in the coming few years. Next slide, please. So how do we counter tigers? I'll just briefly go. People keep asking this every time we count our tigers, we estimate our tigers. So it's statistically a very robust process. It's done in 3 phases. In the first phase, we basically take a measure of the covariates, that is basically the parameters on which a tiger population depends on, and that is largely the availability of prey, the availability of habitat, which is documented during this particular phase. And this is done by walking transects done by the forest departments. They walk the forest and collect all these signs of disturbance on a line transect, as well as document the prey species which are available. In phase 2, this is done at the Wildlife Institute of India. Another set of covariates, which is remotely obtained through remotely sensed data, is analyzed. And in phase 3, we carry out the actual camera trapping part to assess the distribution and the number of tigers in an area. Now, phase 1 and phase 2 are correlated with phase 3 using robust statistical protocols in a SECR framework, that is a spatially explicit capture recapture model. And then we extrapolate our populations to those areas only where tiger signs were found, but tigers were not photo trapped. It's not that we do a random extrapolation of tiger numbers. We only extrapolate populations to areas where they were not camera trapped, but their signs were found. So this phase 3 part is done almost every year now by the states, the annual monitoring, which we call phase 4. So this is largely the process. This has been through a lot of scrutiny. People have asked questions. They've been suitably responded to. In fact, all the criticisms have been addressed through a scientifically published, a scientific publication, which has been peer reviewed and published. Next slide, please. So a lot of, like I said, technology is being funded and technology is being used for the tiger estimation process. I mentioned the M-Stripes application, which is an Android-based application. You can just click once more. So this this is used to do the line transects for estimating vegetation plots, estimating herbivore numbers, prey numbers, or determining the occupancy. So there is a standard set of formats which has now been digitized in this particular application. And this is plugged into a desktop software where all the data is available at a glance and can be analyzed quite quickly. So not only for collection of this data, the M-Stripes application is also used for regular patrolling data, basically to see the spatial coverage of the patrolling and the protection strategy in a tiger reserve. Next slide, please. So we are also now using AI, artificial intelligence, in our All India tiger estimation processes. As most of you may be aware, considering the size of the country, we get nearly 5 crore images of different species from across landscapes, and sorting them is not humanly possible. So we developed an AI-based software which segregates species-wise data, which then finally is seen by a trained human eye to get the final sorted data. We are also working now as a next step to this to develop an AI base, probably develop the same software, enhance this software to individually identify tigers. A lot of challenges in that. We are facing difficulties, but we are working towards that, and hopefully not in the next cycle, but probably the next to next cycle, that should be operational. Next slide, please. So what has been the result of all these estimation exercises, the surveys we do? So over a period of time, we've seen the numbers grow at a rate of 6% annually. We started off in 2006 with 1411 as the estimate. We are currently at 3682. So if you see this map, the blue area is the one where all that distance sampling, line transects were walked. So nearly 40 to 50% of the country is actually walked by people, walked by a forest staff and other personnel to collect this data. And the red is the areas where you actually had tiger presence. If you can just click once more. I mean, such is the scale of this exercise that in the 2018 cycle, we were awarded the Guinness World Record for being the world's largest wildlife survey. So that has been a major achievement. We will gradually and surely be starting the processes for the next cycle, the 2026 cycle, in the coming months. Next slide, please. So we've also been able to, with this data collected over a period of 5 cycles since 6 to 22, We've also collected tremendous amount of data, which we have now archived in a database called the NRCTPT, or the National Repository for Camera Trap Photographs of Tigers. So this is a very usual database, whether it's used to study tiger behavior, whether it's used to study occupancy of tigers over time, whether you want to study tiger movement between landscapes, between protected areas. This database is of immense help. Also, in the cases of wildlife crime, if we happen to detect a tiger pelt somewhere in any part of the world, it can be compared to this particular database to ascertain the source, provided that tiger was photo captured during any of these exercises which we do. Next slide, please. Like I said, management effectiveness evaluation, how effective are our managerial interventions, our management interventions in tiger reserves. We do a MEE exercise every 4 years along with the All India Tiger Estimation. And this particular framework has again been evolved from a world accepted framework, suitably adapted to Indian conditions. Here also we've done 5 cycles. While in the first 2 cycles, there were tiger reserves which featured in the poor category. Subsequently, in the third cycle onwards, because of the regular auditing being done, the inputs being provided, there is no tiger reserve in the poor category now. The lowest category under which a tiger reserve is falling is fair. So we are attempting to move further. Hopefully now even the ones in the fair category would go beyond the fair category into good, very good and excellent. Next slide, please. So we also do a security audit, how well the security mechanisms in a tiger reserve are functioning in India. Again, a framework which is being used across the world in different protected areas. We have suitably modified it, tested it in the field, and now applied it in 25 of our tiger reserves. It has been completed in another 25, so 50 totally, but the report of the second phase in which 25 were done is to be published. So we also know whether the mechanisms which are spelled out for protection in a tiger conservation plan are appropriate or not. If not, suitable modification, appropriate modifications can be carried out. Next slide, please. Active management, another very important area where we are working in. We now have a substantial tiger population in most of our reserves. Vis-a-vis the habitat conditions, we have worked out the carrying capacity of all our tiger reserves in the tiger conservation plan, which is a statutory mandate for each tiger reserve. So we know where tigers are at their carrying capacity, where they have exceeded carrying capacity, and there are a lot of areas where they may be below their carrying capacity. So we have taken out a standard operating procedure based on conservation genetics as to from where we can pick up tigers and where we can put them. So we've understood their genetic composition, and closely related or rather similar, genetically similar structured populations we have divided into different clusters, and we can pick up tigers from a area where they have reached their carrying capacity and put them in an area where their tiger density is low, but the other welfare factors for tiger sustenance are available. So that triangle you see in this slide is the overarching principle on which we advise states, state governments, and tiger reserves. It's self understood. If you have habitat and prey available and tiger numbers are depressed, you can carry out supplementation. Then habitat is there, prey is there, but no tigers, you can carry out reintroductions. You may have habitat available, but with a depressed prey. So your first step there would be to enhance and supplement your prey species. And then you maybe have habitats where the habitat is available where no prey is existing because of various reasons. It could be poaching or a hunting pressure, or maybe there are other factors working in the landscape. So there your first step would be to bring in prey from outside and supplement that. So this is largely the strategy in which we are doing active management across tiger landscapes in the country. Next slide, please. Voluntary village relocation. We want populations, people to have the best facilities, be exposed to all the government schemes and facilities in an area. So people living inside core areas of tiger reserves are given that option. If they want to avail it, they are given a package they move out. There's a cash package available and there is a land package available, both at 15 lakhs per family. The definition of family has also been prescribed, and this has also resulted in a fair amount of areas which have been made available for tigers and wildlife. As on date, roughly around 30% of the villages existing in core areas have been voluntarily rehabilitated outside, and those areas have recovered as pristine wildlife habitats. Next slide, please. So what the Tiger Task Force prescribed at that point of time was to have a core buffer strategy for tiger reserves. You have a central core area which is heavily protected, intensively managed, surrounded by this area called the buffer, which has a lesser degree of protection and has a multiple use areas where other activities can also be carried out using suitable mitigation and, if required, avoidance measures. Next slide, please. So, along with the Wildlife Institute of India, the NTCA worked out what an ideal habitat of a tiger should be. We carried out this population habitat viability analysis study, which told us that to have a viable population of 80 to 100 tigers, one should have a space of around 800 to 1200 square kilometers. So this was the thumb rule which was arrived at. However, next slide, please. The challenge before us lay in the fact that the average protected area size in the country itself is around 215, 216 square kilometers. And over a period of time, these large landscapes have gradually fragmented. You had huge patches earlier, and now we have these small fragmented areas remaining as a PAs, and that too with an average size of 215 odd square kilometers. So how do you manage this situation? Next slide, please. So then we went back to our textbooks of ecology, and we now have a landscape approach to conservation which makes use of the concept of meta-populations. The landscape approach to conservation has also been advocated by the National Wildlife Action Plan of India, which is, and it finds a mention there. So we manage all our tiger reserves in this particular framework, and it is important in context of today's thematic area because this is the framework which we have to manage, where all your linear infrastructure and developmental processes will also factor in the intervening landscape. So what exactly is a metapopulation? It's basically 2 or 3 populations which are connected to each other through corridors. There are different models of metapopulation. There's a mainland island model of metapopulations. Then we have a lot of small populations connected together. Next slide, please. But like I said, the challenge is that the intervening areas would have multiple uses. It would have linear infrastructure, agriculture, industry. There could be developmental projects like mining coming up. So this is the challenge which is largely before us. And how do we manage is basically through that provision of Section 3801B and G, which I mentioned earlier, that we have operationalized a standard process of managing such a challenging landscape. Next slide, please. I mean, this is the real world thing. On the left is the central Indian landscape. Those green areas and yellow areas are the core and buffer areas of tiger reserves. And the light green areas in between are the corridors which we've identified. And we've just overlaid the railway network here. And just imagine the complexity when you add on roads, you add on irrigation projects, you add on industry, what kind of landscape tigers and wildlife is moving in. The picture on the right is basically the railway network of the country, quite dense. And this is just railways. Imagine if you overlay roads, if you overlay transmission lines, if you overlay irrigation canals, etc., the challenging landscape which we have. So how do we go about this whole thing? Next slide, please. So what we are promoting now is green growth. And in the Third Asia Ministerial Conference on Tiger Conservation, it was remarked by the Honorable Prime Minister that tigers should not be seen as a as an impediment to growth. Rather, both conservation and development should go hand in hand. So, like I mentioned earlier, we've already delineated the major tiger corridors in the country, and using this document, states are now refining their corridors in their tiger conservation plan. In fact, the NTCA is currently undertaking an exercise where we are refining this document further for the benefit of wildlife practitioners as well as infrastructure development agencies who can have a look and then factor it in their planning process itself. The other document which I spoke about earlier was that we've also, in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment and Forests, come out with a document which highlights the mitigation that needs to be adopted in such landscapes. Tiger landscapes, elephant landscapes have been discussed separately. What is the minimum mitigation measure one should adopt in these landscapes has been spelt out. And apart from this, we are also having regular engagement with stakeholders who are involved in these developmental processes, be it the National Highways Authority, road development agencies, the railways, the electricity departments, electricity boards. So we are having periodic meetings, regular meetings with them, developing their capacity, and they are telling us their problems and challenges in implementing such a strategy. So we are also further refining over a period of these workshops and time. The Wildlife Institute of India is the portal through which we actually undertake this exercise. In fact, just recently there was a workshop in respect of elephants wherein stakeholders were invited and we had these. So all this has been is an outcome of the mandate that was given in the Wildlife Protection Act to the NTCA. It has become more codified, more streamlined. And next slide, please. And there has been a realization. Dipankarji spoke about this, that there has been a realization even in the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, and this is a 2019 a paper article in which NHAI has told its consultants to avoid all roads in protected areas, corridors, and wherever there is any wildlife issue involved. So while they are thinking in terms of the clearances which would be required, I think that is a positive in itself, because you are mitigating all the adverse effects of these infrastructures which are coming up in tiger and wildlife landscapes. And next slide, please. Of course, a key constraint, like Dipankarji mentioned, the kind of budgets which the NHAI and the railways have. Ours is completely the opposite situation. Not that we require those kinds of funds, but still our budgetary allocation is a pittance. It is just the entire ministry's allocation is 3,000 odd crores in the current financial year, out of which the Project Tiger budget is 290 crores, which is just 0.006% of the overall Government of India budget. And if you see Project Tiger as a percent of the MOEFCC's budget, we are just around 9% of the ministry's budget also. But in spite of all these constraints, the budgetary constraint, next slide, please. Next slide, please. In spite of all these budgetary constraints, we have been able to demonstrate the leadership, if I can say that, reiterate that in the field of tiger conservation after the establishment of the NTCA. Our protocols, processes are very robust. They have evolved over time. They are being refined as per the needs of the hour for the benefit of both tigers as well as mankind. As you all are aware, that we are an aspirational nation trying to be a developed nation by 2047. So the tiger should never ever be seen as a drag on development. So all these protocols, processes, methodologies have evolved, and the most fortunate part is that we have a lot of political will for tiger conservation in the country. The Honorable Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, in fact, has been evincing a keen interest in tiger conservation. He inaugurated the third Asia Ministerial Conference in 2016. The 2018 All India Tiger Estimation results were declared to the nation by him, and the 2022 results of the All India Tiger Estimation were declared to the nation by him. And he also presided over the 50-year function celebrations of Project Tiger in 2023 last year. So with this political will and the kind of protocols, processes we have evolved under this leadership, India has attained a lot of prominence in the field of tiger conservation, which has now seen us, in fact, this experience which we've gained has now seen us bring cheetahs into India. It's the only country to have done a transcontinental reintroduction of a species is based on all these experiences is India. We've introduced them in Puno National Park. And the other important thing is that using all this experience, the kind of information we have, the kind of data we've had, the kind of data sharing and information sharing which we are having with the other nations through bilaterals, other tiger range countries through bilaterals, has also helped us establish the International Big Cat Alliance. The Honorable Prime Minister mentioned this idea during the 2018 release of the result that India should engage with other countries, establish a collaborative alliance. And that materialized in 2022 when he launched the International Big Cat Alliance in April 2023 during 50 years celebration of Project Tiger. And the IBCA has now been approved by the cabinet. Its interim secretariat is functional. 6 nations have already signed the framework agreement of joining the IBCA, and 26 nations have already consented to be members. So this is all these protocols, processes which we spoke about, which India has been implementing regularly on a periodic basis, has now been accepted as more or less as the gold standard in the field of tiger conservation across the world. This has helped us bring cheetah. This has helped us establish the IBCA. So tigers would probably be the next soft diplomacy instrument available to the government of India to work on different aspects. I would like to end by reiterating what the Honorable Prime Minister mentioned during his third Asia Ministerial Conference speech. His statement is now resonating with most countries, tiger range countries, and big cat range countries across the world, is that tiger conservation is not a choice but an imperative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for that detailed and insightful talk on how India has emerged as the leader, not only in tiger conservation, but the conservation portfolio at large, and also how it is reaching out to other countries as well, as we can see the collaborative approach, whether it is through the IBCA and the existing forums, as well as the bilateral instruments which are working. So it has been a great journey, and it's always a pleasure to listen to this successful conservation story of our country. With that, now I move on to the next speaker. And as Dr. Vaibhav Mathur mentioned, that it's important that conservation and development go together, and definitely conservation is not a drag on development. Another one of the famous statements from our Honorable Prime Minister. So I now invite Mr. Pankaj Kumar Maurya, who is the Project Director of National Highway Authority of India at Dehradun, Uttarakhand. The stretch of Delhi, Saharanpur, Dehradun Economic Corridor nearby Rajaji Tiger Reserve has been constructed under his monitoring. This highway crosses adjacent to the area of Rajaji National Park, where NHAI has constructed 12 kilometers of an elevated highway structure to safeguard the free movement of wildlife. I welcome you, sir, and look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, good afternoon. I hope I am audible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon to all the participants, and a special thanks to organizers for giving me this opportunity to present the National Highway Authority of India's initiative in the field of linear infrastructure for wildlife friendly measures. So today I am basically presenting a successfully implemented project which is constructed recently on the border of Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand, and this is the one of the drone pic of the project which I am going to present today. This is part of 6-lane Delhi-Dehradun expressway actually, and it is 12-kilometer long elevated structure for wildlife crossing, especially constructed for this purpose. And as on date, it is among the longest elevated corridor perhaps in the world, as per the discussion with WII. So for better appreciation and understanding of the project.
Pankaj sir, can I stop you, sir? Sir, we are not seeing your main presentation screen. Can you please switch it to the main presentation screen, please?
Just a minute. I'll share it. Okay. Is it visible now?
Yes, sir. Can you please switch to presentation mode, please?
Yeah. Is it visible now?
It is visible, but the thing is, we're seeing your secondary screen, not the primary screen. So if you can switch on to.
Just a minute.
Is there any option for swipe screen or something?
Yeah, screen.
So can I ask you, how many screens are you currently using? 1 or 2? Yes, now it is visible, sir. It is visible now. Let's proceed. Thank you.
So basically, this is the project which we are going to present today, and this is constructed on the border of Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand as a part of Delhi-Dehradun expressway. You see this pic on the right side of the river. There is a Raja National Park, and on the left side of the river is Shivalik Reserve Forest. So in order to facilitate free crossing of wildlife from one side of the forest to another side, this project was conceived. So for a better understanding and insight of the project, I will start with some of the photographs of this project, so that while traversing through the presentation, we have a clear picture how the things have been done. So as I have told that the project is already constructed recently in the month of November itself, and these are some of the drone pics. So as I told that the project is located on the border of Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand, basically very near to Dehradun. And Dehradun is located in northern part of India. It is basically capital of the state Uttarakhand. The Uttarakhand shares its border with China and Nepal. So what was the need for development of this highway? Actually, with the growth of country, government of India trying to uplift all the corners of the country with economic corridors. So it was decided by government of India to connect national capital of India, New Delhi, with the state capital, Dehradun, through a high-speed corridor. Accordingly, it was decided to have this kind of project so that remote areas may be connected through economic centers. As I told that this existing road was there, but the existing road was quite narrow. It was barely 2-lane. So the number of vehicles moving on the road was quite high, and it has already achieved its carrying capacity, and the number of curves were very high, and the existing road was quite geometrically deficient. So in order to take care of all these deficiencies, and at the same time, since this road was at grade, means it was on the ground, so if a wildlife animal is trying to cross from one side to the another, it was almost impossible for them to cross from one side of the forest to another side. And due to this, a number of accidents were also reported on this road. So the journey of achievement for this project started long back in 2019-20. The DPR was taken up in the 2019-20, and based on the findings of PPRs, the forest clearance and wildlife clearances were obtained in the years 2020 and 21. Wildlife Institute of India was also requested for studies. I will cover it later on in detail. And based on their studies, this project was conceived. The project implementation was started in the month of October 2021, and the same was completed as of now, it has already been completed. So during the DPR phase, when it was observed that rich flora and fauna is there and Rajaji National Park is very near to the project corridor, so it was decided by government that we should take advanced measures for protection of this area, since this is very ecologically sensitive area. So NHAI approached Wildlife Institute of India for carrying out a study, and the request of NHAI, they accepted the request of NHAI, and they carried out a study for this corridor during the period April to July 2020. They installed 81 number of trap cameras, and based on the findings of these trap cameras, they designed the project corridor. So for the purpose of a study, Wildlife Institute of India did zonation of this last 20 kilometers of project, which is very rich in flora and fauna. So the zonation was done based on the topographical conditions and on the basis of past data of wildlife movement available with the institute. So if you see the zone 1 was basically kind of plain terrain. Big animals mostly cross from this zone. So zone 1 is relatively plain, and zone 2 is kind of hilly terrain, and zone 3 is kind of rolling terrain. So based on these 3 homogeneous sections, they further propose the mitigation measures. So these are the findings and crossings of the different species of wildlife. It was well documented in the report. The report is quite bulky, so I'm sharing some of the glimpse of the report. So a number of animals of different species were found to be crossing the project corridor, like Asian elephants were crossing through the plain areas, leopards and other. The list is quite long. So you can see there are different species of animals which were crossing the project corridor. So these all crossings were recorded and well documented, and based on that, if you see this, this is showing the crossing of leopards through the project corridor. This is study long back in 2021. So based on the data obtained from the field, Wildlife Institute of India recommended 3.50 kilometers to be elevated in the zone 1, that is total length is 4.90 kilometers. And for the zone 2, they recommended 6.80 kilometers should be elevated out of 13.30 kilometer length, and 400 meters to be elevated in last zone, that is 1.80 kilometers. So if we summarize it, so out of 20 kilometers, it was recommended to elevate 10.70 kilometers through some kind of flyover elevated structure. The recommendations of Wildlife Institute of India was submitted to Government of India. And the mitigation measures suggested by Wildlife Institute of India were very costly affair to NHAI, because initially it was thought to widen the existing road, which was costing us around 30 to 35 crore rupees per kilometer. But the elevated corridor was costing around 100 crore rupees per kilometer. So in totality, for 20 kilometer only, there was a difference of around 800 crore rupees, around $94 million US. Although Government of India looking after the environmental and ecological benefits, the recommendations of WII were accepted, and it was a big lead to start the project. So finally, based on the engineering parameters, the project was redesigned looking at the topographical, gradient and geometrics requirement, and finally NHAI came up with 4.40 kilometers elevated corridor in zone 1 against the recommended 3.50 kilometers. Similarly, in zone 2, it was 7.60 kilometers against the 6.80 recommended by WII. And in the zone 3, it is 1.8 kilometers against the 400 meter recommended. So in total, the recommended length was 10.70 kilometers. However, NHAI came up with a new design of 13.80 kilometers elevated corridor in this stretch of 20 kilometers. In addition to this elevated corridor, some other structures were also incorporated in the project, like 6 number of animal underpasses, 3 number of major bridges, 16 number of minor bridges. These structures can also be used by small animals to cross the corridor. Similarly, box culvert and pipe culverts were also incorporated, so small animals and reptiles can use that also. And one tunnel of 370 meter was also incorporated in the project. So finally, this is the finalized plan. Finally, out of 20 kilometers, 12 kilometer elevated corridor was provisioned. 370 meters length of tunnel incorporated in the project, 2 animal underpasses, and 6 number of animal underpasses were incorporated in the project. This is the development plan. So some of the pictures, this is a drone pic of zone 1 during construction. There were lots of challenges. So as I told, that project has been prepared in such a way to minimize the cutting of number of trees. If you see that this project is almost on the bank, touching the tree canopy, and minimizing the number of cutting of trees for the project. This is zone 1, which I told that is relatively a plain area. If you see on the right hand side of this structure, you can see there is an existing road which is quite narrow. It is passing through the forest area. So with the increase of traffic day by day, the crossing of animals was becoming difficult, and number of accidents were also observed between vehicular and wildlife. This is another view. This is a drone view of a peak under construction during in the zone 2, which is relatively a hilly area. The project is constructed all along the kind of bank of the river. This is another peak of zone 2. You can see the extent of hills both sides. This is the tunnel under construction. This is zone 3. 2 number of elephant underpasses are, you can see the number of the pillars are visible for elephant underpasses. And you can see the dense canopy of forest both sides of this corridor. The same elephant underpass under construction in zone 3. The elephant underpasses where this project was constructed over the existing road. So in this stretch, no tree were cut down, and it was planned in such a way that first 3 lane was constructed, and then traffic was opened on this 3 lane, then existing road was again converted in 3 lanes. So finally 6 lane was constructed. So the sequencing of construction was kept in such a way to minimize the cutting of trees. A number of challenges were faced during execution, like initially when the project was started, 24-hour working was allowed, but later on wildlife authorities restricted the working hour from sunrise to sunset only. As I told, that the project is going through the river, so this is a rain-fed river. So during monsoon season, every year 2-3 months, there was a tendency of flash flooding of the river. So heavy machinery movement was almost impossible. So during those periods, project was affected, and since the presence of wildlife also there, so many a times laborers were scared to see the when they saw the wildlife crossing from one side to another side, and there was no telecommunication network, so that was also a big challenge in coordination during the project, during construction of the project. This was the civil part of the project. In addition to that, we have incorporated some additional wildlife friendly measures, like noise and sound barriers have been installed. And with the help of Wildlife Institute of India, 6 number of cameras are being installed on each pillar, so that the effectivity of this construction could be monitored. So NHAI has tied up with Wildlife Institute of India for next 5 years to monitor how effectively these corridors are being used by wildlife, so that future planning may be done accordingly, whether such kind of structures, how the animals are using, how much should be the extent of these kind of structures, length, etc. In addition to that, NHAI has tied up with the Forest Department to eco-restore the area in 116 hectares nearby areas. So Forest Department is doing recharge holes, check dams, plantation rescue arrangements with the help of NHAI. The whole expenditure is funded by NHAI. This is the sound and light barriers already installed in this project. These are good quality barriers installed. So as I told that 600 number of cameras are being installed, total 600 pillars are there. So on each pillar there will be one camera. So next five years it will be studied by WII. So I hope this structure will fulfill the intended purpose. And with these words, I'll thank again to all the participants and the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was very informative, and we were actually mesmerized by the pictures. I'm pretty sure all the participants must have pretty much enjoyed it. And we have heard your presentation before also. We have been fortunate enough to know about your work in this area. I would just look into the questions if something is directed to. So there is definitely one which Shwankar has asked, which probably you can also talk about the challenges that you faced about this, because you did talk about the timeline. So Shwankar has asked that forest clearance is asked by National State Highway Authority after the preparation of DPR for any developmental project. As in the DPR stage, there are provisions to incorporate relevant mitigation measures. Perhaps it would be better if forest clearance is done before finalizing the DPR. So at the policy level, sir, he is probably requesting you to tell us about the challenges and what are your thoughts on this particular?
Yeah, definitely there are lots of challenges because we were working in the remote area, and at the same time, since we are working in a very near to the national park, so we had to comply with all the observations and norms of the area. Regarding DPR and forest clearance, like as of now, DPR and forest clearance both are part of each other, kind of they run parallel to each other. For example, if during forest clearance some recommendations or some corrections are recommended by authorities, then those corrections are incorporated in the project. Project is started only after clearance from the forest authorities. Few years back, it was practiced to start the project in advance, but nowadays not a single project is coming up without the clearances and incorporation of recommendations of forest authorities. So the corrections are well taken in advance. So there is no issue as on date in any project in India. I think this is the same procedure following throughout the country.
Thank you, Mr. Maurya. I think I'll because your presentation, people are still processing a lot of information. I would like to request Dr. Mathur to probably answer the questions from the participant. Two participants has actually asked about, Matteo and Shering has asked about the grant funding and can tiger conservation project be bankable? Can we move from grant funding and include sources of funding that would typically require an XYZ return to investors in order to minimize the risk of grant? And probably the major reason that which participant would like you to highlight on is how do you envision ensuring the sustainability of long-term conservation initiatives in future, especially in the light of potential funding challenges and evolving priorities?
Right, thank you for the question. Very valid, because even the Ministry of Finance here keeps asking us for a sunset date to tiger conservation. But fortunately, we have been able to justify the ongoing nature of the scheme of Project Tiger as to how a continued support would be required from the government of India. And because, as you're aware, that India is a federal system of government, all the states are not at par with respect to the kind of resources they generate. So there are a lot of states, in fact, majority of the states would require an ongoing support from the government of India, the federal government of India. So as on date, we have been successful in convincing our Ministry of Finance that there is a need to understand the ongoing nature of Project Tiger, as to how the threats to tigers are ever persistent. And like I said, the political will has ensured that financial assistance is being provided right from 1970 through till 2026. In fact, we are now in the process of formulating a project for the next 5 years, from 26 onwards, for the next 5 years, and answering the same set of questions which you have asked. But apart from government funding, I would like to mention that we are also looking at corporates in India. There is the scheme of corporate social responsibility, wherein wildlife and tiger conservation is one of the activities that can be funded. So while, if I take the example of Project Cheetah, while it is being funded under Project Tiger also, one of the big corporates in India, Indian Oil Corporation Limited, has also come forth and given a substantial amount for funding Project Cheetah for the first 5 years. So we have now also started exploring corporate social responsibility initiatives of different companies. In fact, there was a doubt earlier whether tiger conservation and wildlife conservation would be covered under that. But we specifically queried the Ministry of Corporate Affairs in this regard, and they gave us a very categorical yes, that tiger and wildlife conservation can be funded under CSR. Of course, corporates have their priority towards health, the education sector, etc. But it is the task is on us. The challenge is before us as to how well we present our case, and we have succeeded in the context of Cheetah. And hopefully we should be able to come up with DPRs and project reports in various thematic areas, which can be taken on a one-time basis through these CSR schemes. The other thing which we have talked about, and but which has not yet materialized, is the concept of tiger bonds. The question which we are encountering there is that how much would the return be? So, like I said, we've already done preliminary exercises vis-a-vis intangibles coming out out of tiger reserve. But how do we market them and fit them into the framework of a return from a tiger reserve is the challenge before us. So it's not that we are just looking at government grants. Of course, that would be our mainstay. We have been till now able to convince our government. There is political will, so we would be continuing with that. But all the other the funding which I spoke about would be a supplement to it. Another thing which we are exploring in select tiger reserves is the carbon market. How carbon markets can be explored to provide supplemental fundings to our tiger reserves. So we are doing a preliminary exercise in 6 tiger reserves in
हमारा तो
India.
कुछ नहीं था
So
कुछ पूछे
it's not yet materialized again, but the substantial groundwork has been done, largely because the carbon markets itself are currently in a stage of flux, and they're not very sure of the returns a carbon credit would fetch. So we are exploring. It's not that we are sticking to government funding. We are exploring all these alternatives, and let's see how it goes. We'll have to be at it. So there are a lot of, in fact, questions for my presentation. There's something to do with Kaziranga. How do we address local livelihood? So, like I said, Project Tiger has an inclusive agenda. There is a very definitive component of eco development. of these areas and fringe areas around the tiger reserves, where again we have a convergence of different schemes of the government, not necessarily Project Tiger, but how the local tiger reserve management can leverage these schemes to address the concerns of people living around protected areas and tiger reserves. There are schemes from the Ministry of Rural Development, there are schemes of the Ministry of Skill Development, which are being leveraged by various tiger reserves across different states to have a convergence and dovetailing of ideas. So that is working in our favor. But of course, the immediate response to a conflict event, whether it's a tiger or a elephant, does need a very strong response mechanism. That too we have been able to achieve to a large extent through the instrument of something called a Tiger Conservation Foundation, which each tiger reserve has is statutorily supposed to have. So what happens is, how field directors of tiger reserves utilize this is that in case there is a conflict event, immediate dispersal of say ex gratia, immediate dispersal of loss of property, immediate dispersal of some hospital treatment if it is required to the affected person, can be carried out near immediately by the tiger reserve management itself. A lot of states in India have also declared human wildlife conflict as a disaster. So there are also funds and financial assistance available from the disaster management authority of the state. So that is how we are trying to, get as many schemes as possible to converge and dovetail to address the fringe issue. And there's another question on phase 4 monitoring. Yes, phase 4 monitoring is exactly like the phase 3 monitoring, but it's done annually. The phase 3 monitoring, when done annually, is called phase 4, but when it's done as part of the quadrennial All India Tiger Estimation, it is called phase 3. So it's the same thing. Okay, there's another question on assessment of each voluntary village relocation. Right. So this is in fact an area where we are lacking in, and this is under discussion that we should have a mechanism or a protocol to assess the positives which have come out from a village relocation exercise, both in terms of the people. There is a provision to handhold them for 5 years, but how has that affected them in the long term is something which we are looking at. And the other thing is from the ecological point of view, that the area vacated by that village, as to how well it's functioning in terms of the ecological dynamics, both in context of flora as well as fauna. So, is there anything else for me?
So one more question is, what are the plans for infrastructure development in heavily human-dominated corridors where entire city railways and highways intersect between two forest patches and critical for movement of tiger, elephant, and leopard? And on this question, sir, I also wanted to add, like this, you have already explained in your presentation that you have moved towards the landscape conservation for the tigers. But your views on involving, say, other government agencies like planners, the urban planners, and most of these tiger habitats are kind of overlapping in major cities also, like Dehradun, Bhopal. So how much that your insights on that, because under this project, Align project, we are currently engaging with the planners and building the capacity for understanding the nature safeguard available. But from the tiger habitat perspective, from how do you think that this could be taken to another scale up? Your views on it.
So I mean, you would be aware that everything trickles down fairly slowly in India. So the amendment which was brought in 2006, which had prescribed to take care of landscapes and corridors, etc., is now being seen in its full-fledged scheme of things after almost like 15-20 years of its first being mentioned. And that too, I must say that there was a litigation, in fact, which resulted in all these mitigation measures being adopted. So most of the stakeholders vis-a-vis infrastructure development are now being taken on board. Like I said, they are being addressed through the portal of the Wildlife Institute of India for stakeholder meetings, etc., etc. Urban development, as far as urban development is concerned, the scope of involving urban planners with urban planners in context of mainstreaming tiger conservation concerns in urban planning is something we are yet to begin on. But I'm sure that it is going to happen. Like I said, 2006 we first uh, got it out in the act, and now 2024 you are actually seeing the effects of that particular regulation and that provision of law, how it's working out. Urban planning, yes, I would say have not been involved currently because largely our PAs and tiger reserves are in remote habitats where the urban planning laws and regulations may not be enforced. But yes, I would also like to state the fact that just yesterday, the state of Madhya Pradesh has notified the Ratapani Tiger Reserve, which is bang next to its capital city of Bhopal. So yes, urban planning would come into the picture. We, in fact, should work towards that particular um, aspect too. The primary question that how do we ensure movement is uh, largely in context of infrastructure development, heavily human dominated corridors is I would be surprised if an animal would actually move on a regular basis in a city. There may be sporadic events of animals entering into city for which there are response mechanisms. You have rapid response teams for picking up that animal and taking it to a suitable habitat. So heavily dominated cities would probably not fall in a scheme of things because that would not be the most probable area where animal movement would be observed. So that's my response to that. So
Thank you so much, sir. And I think the last question Tanu Seni has asked, and I would pose it to both the speakers if they can give your views on it. Considering the upcoming developmental projects by the government, how is the green growth achieved? What are the challenges in achieving sustainable development?
So, if I can take that before the
Yes.
gentleman from NHAI. So, like I said, the first and most important thing was to have a provision to actually implement such a thing. That came about in 2006 in the Wildlife Protection Act, which gave the statutory mandate to this authority to actually see developmental projects in these corridor areas, interlinking areas, and even within tiger reserves, buffer areas. So that was the first step in that. The second step was to gradually bring a turnaround in the thinking of infrastructure development agencies who were coming to the Ministry of Environment and Forest for clearances at the terminal stage when most of the project had already been completed. So because of all these provisions and these stakeholder workshops, what has now started happening is that the infrastructure development agencies are factoring in all these aspects at the planning stage itself. So there is very few fait accompli situations now. So that is a major change which is happening. So like we heard a presentation on the Dehradun Expressway. So all that was thought of well in advance. They went to the WII, Wildlife Institute of India. They thought of the mitigation as to how best the road would come up in, especially when you have a fragile ecology of the Shivaliks in between. So how do we go about that? So all that is now coming right in the planning stage itself. So automatically the implementation becomes much easier. So that's how we are trying to achieve green growth. The challenges, of course, like I said, we are an aspirational nation. Urbanization is going to expand. More and more infrastructure is going to come up. But like I said, we have the provisions to actually mitigate whatever adverse effects these infrastructure was happening earlier. We now have categorical scientific database documents which would help us alleviate to the largest extent possible the damaging effects of such infrastructure.
Thank you so much, sir. Mr. Maurya, would you like to add your comments?
I would like to add. The question is regarding green cover basically being affected by huge number of infrastructure projects being taken up. So as I told that before taking up any infrastructure project, if it is crossing through forest area, we need to take forest clearance. So earlier, before December 2023, there was a provision. If suppose X area of land is being diverted for the project, then 2x means double of that land has to be planted in the degraded forest. Now December 2023 onwards, now we have to give equivalent private land so that the cover of forest remains the same. So this, as of now, that is the provision has been changed from the earlier one in order to maintain the green cover. So any project coming up only can come up after completing all these formalities and procedure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Mathur, Mr. Maurya, you both have actively answered most of our questions. And if there's any other query, we have the provision of taking it up over the mail and answering it. The recordings will be shared to all the participants. And we are so much thankful that you have given your so much of time and there are over 100, almost 100 participants right now, and they have excitedly asked all the questions. You have excitedly answered all of their queries. And it has been from our side, we feel that it is a very successful webinar from India. So thank you so much. We would like to end the webinar now. And I would like to thank my team also, Mr. Pramod Neopane, who is lead Align Project India. And from WWF-India, we have, of course, Dr. Dipankar Ghosh has already given the introductory remark. We have a project officer, Diya Haldar. And from GTF, we have Mr. Arun Kumar with us, who was co-hosting this webinar also. And we would like to thank all the participants, and we will be sharing the link of the recording on the YouTube channel of WWF India, as well as it will be shared on your mail also. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.